on some advice and really made me kind of think about these things. So I thought this was a really interesting conversation. So I'm curious, from more of a movement standpoint, how would you answer that question? You know, if this guy doesn't want to die in a gym, like, how is he going to stay in shape? You know, he still needs a couple pounds to lose. He doesn't need to do anything crazy. What would you tell somebody like that?
I get the question a lot, you know, and I always just tell people, like, just, you know, make walking cool, get outside and go for walks, you know, like, I think it's literally the easiest thing anyone can do, just to, like, get that ball moving, build some inertia and build some momentum. When you do that and you're outside walking, you know, of course you're going to increase your step count, but you're going to increase that NEAT score and, you know, that non-exercise activity thermogenesis. The calories burned through that is always greater than calories burned through working out. So it's like, if this is a bigger piece of the puzzle, let's work on that big piece first with something that's super duper easy, and then build some consistency around that. And it's the easiest thing. You don't really realize the impact it can make until you do it, you know, consistently enough and long enough. And then when you build that inertia, that's going to give you that momentum, and it's going to be easier to go, okay, I'm walking now 4 days a week. Let's take that 5th day and let's get 30 minutes in the gym. You know, and then you can start getting that 30 minutes and you're accumulating more work, and then before you know it, it's 2 days in the gym, and then before you know it, you're 3 days for an hour, you know, and then before you know it, you're a year in, you're making some serious progress, and it's in a very sustainable way because you started small and you started layering on top of it.
Let's take the path of least resistance and just like move as easy as movement can be, which is just bipedal movement and just doing it for long periods of time. So if I can walk for 30 minutes, 7 days per week, is that going to be more valuable than like 3 20-minute high intensity interval training sessions? And while you're going to burn more energy in those 20 minutes unit of time, I bet that person could be consistent. And consistent for me is on the manner of like years and decades, not days and weeks. So I think that's a key aspect. You know, I'm in a huge agreement, and I think that people, if done consistently, they can make massive improvements to not only their health metabolically, but also their body composition as well.
You know, it's a super powerful tool because it's so much more than just walking, you know what I mean? Yeah. It's all these mental benefits, it's the metabolic benefits, it's everything.
Yeah, so that's interesting. So without like adding additional time to our days, which is some of people's biggest concerns, is like, I've got kids, I've got a job and all these things, I can't do all this other stuff. But you can stack walking on top of a walking meditation with your animal while getting sunlight and doing conscious breathing, for example. And it also serves as the bookend of your day, separating work into your personal time. I really like that aspect as well. Yeah, absolutely. So I think that handles kind of the movement aspect. From a nutritional aspect, I'd like to just kind of throw something on the table and see what you think. One of the biggest things that I see is people chronically are under eating certain macronutrients. And to start this off, going back to the conversation with my buddy today, he was like, man, about 10 years ago, my next door neighbor was a vegan. He was 50 years old and he looked like he was 30. And so what the vegan told me, and this really stuck home with me, he's like, do you ever see anybody walking around with a protein deficiency? Ryan's like, no, that never happens. And he's like, that really stuck with me. So I've really looked to move more plant-based, move more to a vegetarian perspective. And, you know, my response to him was, I totally agree. There's not many people in the United States walking around with a protein deficiency. It just doesn't really happen. But many of us are overweight. We have metabolic disease and we're very far away from health. And so just because you're deficient doesn't mean that you're not, it's a departure from what's optimal. And so, you know, he's like, I've heard this wisdom of like 1 gram per pound of body weight, and I just don't really think I need to do it. And I was like, yeah, maybe you do, maybe you don't. But let me just give you a little perspective here. Say hypothetically, you know, an adult male is going to eat 2,000 to 3,000 calories per day, depending on their size, and they'll be able to maintain their body weight there. And let's just say hypothetically, you eat 2,400 calories per day. He weighs about 200 pounds. So if he ate 1 gram per pound of body weight, that's going to be about 200 grams of protein, which is 800 calories from just protein. If he eats 200 grams of carbs, that's 800 calories from carbohydrates. And then if he eats about 115 grams of fat, that's going to be about 800 calories there as well. So that's a balanced diet just from like a macronutrient ratio. That's 30%, 33%, 33%, 33%. So while 200 grams of protein might feel like a lot to some people, it's actually what I would consider more of a balanced diet from just a macronutrient perspective, but there's a lot of benefits from that. It's so satiating, right? So if I gave you a bunch of chicken breasts, like you're a big guy, you can eat a lot of chicken, but like after a while you're kind of done, right? But if I give you like bags of chips or like Pringles or whatever your kryptonite is, like I imagine you can keep on going, right? Because it's this dense form of energy, it's salty, it's fat, and leptin doesn't really catch up. These satiety hormones don't really catch up and make us feel full. So protein does that. Additionally, it has a very, very high metabolic effect, just due to the fact that it's very expensive for our body to break down. And it also is important, I think, because it kind of feeds back into immunity. Both fat and protein does. Our cellular membranes are made up of primarily fat and degrees of protein as well. And if we're not eating enough, I see typically more immune challenges with people if they're kind of deficient on some of those things. So deficiency, I would say is like more disease, but that's a departure from what's optimal. So I'm curious your thoughts. I think we're in agreement. Like, don't go to a gym initially, just go walk, right? And eventually you get really good at that. Go to a gym over time. But the second piece, I would say protein is just a very, very, very powerful to integrate to the point where I want everybody to understand what is their protein serving at each meal or snack. And I'm curious what your thoughts are.
When there's less protein in the diet, there's usually the other macronutrients are usually a lot higher, specifically carbohydrates, right? And I think, kind of even looking away from what's happening physiologically, when you start increasing protein, like you said, it's going to have that satiety effect. And you're usually going to not eat as many carbohydrates. It's like as soon as protein comes up, the balance already starts to happen. You know what I mean? And I think that's, for a lot of people, it's almost daunting when they hear like 1 gram per pound body weight, because they're like, there's no way, right? And it's not about getting to that point necessarily. It's just about, okay, where are you and how much protein are you eating currently, and how can we facilitate more so that, if you're eating, 100 grams of protein, for that same example, he's trying to get to 200, he's only eating 100. Those carbohydrates are probably up around 350, 400, and now all of a sudden, even if you're going to 125, guarantee you carbohydrates are going to come down a little bit.
Yeah.
If you go up to 150, I guarantee you carbohydrates are going to come down a little bit.
So it's like a seesaw almost.
Yeah, again, you have those physiological effects, but like you said, you're gonna just feel more full. You're not gonna want to eat as much, and you're also going to just continue to improve that thermogenic effect and continue being more metabolic.
Yeah. So this is an interesting thought experiment. Okay, we're in a world right now where we are incredibly unhealthy. From my perspective, type 2 diabetes is a completely preventable disease. If we look at the cost to the United States in terms of healthcare, if we just eradicated that one chronic disease, not only financially, but also all the suffering that happens would drastically change. And so by 2030, 50% of adults will be not just overweight, but obese, right? That's significant, right? Now more people are unhealthy than are healthy. So we're moving very, very far away from what's optimal. In conjunction with this, we're spending 18.9% of our GDP on purely healthcare costs alone. We don't have healthcare statistics that exceeds the healthcare statistics of Cuba. I'm really fascinated by this whole world. So just in our kind of dream state, what do you think would happen if everybody walked 10,000 steps per day and they ate 1 to 2 palms of protein at each meal or snack? What do you think would happen just to the overall health? And I mean, that even might feed into like the productivity of our nation.
Yeah, I mean, I think more so than the physical, I think like mentally we would benefit greatly from just doing, like, I feel like it's more of like a mental thing, honestly. Like, yes, like type 2, I obviously think, the type 2 diabetes cases would significantly drop, but I think if everyone was walking, everyone was eating more protein, I think everyone would just be a little bit happier. And I think if people were a little bit happier, they would find a little bit more meaning in their work, they would find a little bit more meaning in relationships, they would be willing to put more effort toward those things so that they could live a little bit more fulfilled. But when we're constantly, chasing sugar, and we're chasing these cravings, and we're eating our tail and just living this unhealthy life, it's going to have a huge effect on our mental health. And I definitely think the overall state of health in the United States has a direct influence on the mental health of everyone in the United States as well.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. It seems that chasing pleasure, right? So short-term gratification via sugar and food, and I mean even sex and drugs and some of these other things that people get into. Chasing pleasure robs us of long-term fulfillment. Yeah. And it seems like what you're saying is that this will start to push us a bit towards a bit more enjoyment and fulfillment in our lives, just collectively as a nation.
Yeah, I think, I was kind of talking about this earlier in the week, how I really felt like it was like the 90s was like this decade of like ultra convenience. It was like all these different things came out, and like you could microwave a full meal that has 3 different types of food, and you can microwave it in 3 minutes and it's ready to go, right? Like there was a lot of things like that where we weren't looking at the long-term effects. So we weren't aware of them, right? And we were purely looking for convenience. And I feel like a lot of people now, even in 2021, are still kind of stuck in that mindset of like, how can I make this the most convenient thing for me, instead of, how can I make this the best thing for me for long-term success?
It's like, how much can we get away with before it bites me in the ass versus like, how can I live this badass fulfilling life? It's two interesting paradigms. Yeah. And I think collectively we've started to push towards the former.
Right. Yeah. I just, even just growing up into now, I find it interesting, because definitely growing up, it was that mindset, especially with, I have 6 siblings. It was, how can we feed all these mouths and make it the most convenient thing, and make it something that all these little assholes will actually eat. That was a big problem my mother had. We're at a point now where people are starting to become aware of how unhealthy the United States has gotten, and now there's all this new old information that we knew 20, 30 years ago about getting sunlight and about eating protein and about just basic movement practice. And now that's all starting to come back, which is good, but it's a battle for the health professional. Yeah. Because we're fighting against a lot of these people who they've just been ingrained in that lifestyle, and that's all they really know. And all of a sudden you're like, talking about eating close to the ground, and like, but I can heat that up in 2 minutes,
Yeah, I think that touches on a beautiful topic, is that, we can give people like, all you got to do is eat protein and walk. But until you start to talk about people's guiding philosophies, then things really don't change. If we're trying to shift outcomes, we have to look at behaviors. Yeah. If we want to shift behaviors, we have to talk about values and priorities. And I think it's also interesting, like we have an ostensibly virulent virus around right now. And we have 4.2% of the world's population, but our COVID deaths make up 20%. So, if you just kind of think about, who is the lion going to get? Well, he's going to get the slowest gazelle. Who is the virus going to get? He's going to take down the weaker people. And so I think we're seeing these things, and I think it's just interesting to think about, if we were more happy, healthy, and optimized as a nation, would this pandemic have been so challenging for our economy, for all the families and people that suffered? I mean, it's truly a tragedy what happened. And the only way that people see the solution is like, you got to get vaccinated, which I think makes sense for the majority of people. But if we just have better lifestyles, would we have needed to be this, pushy with this implement? I think it's just an interesting thought experiment.
Yeah, and I agree, for sure.